Secular mindfulness movement started actually when John Kabat-Zinn in 1990 started this medicalizing mindfulness to a treatment program. Buddha never intended this as a treatment program. The original intention was to end suffering. And this was confirmed by Richard Davidson recently, 2017. He said, the mindfulness is not for treatment per se, it is to end suffering. And John Kabat-Zinn went back in 2011 and kind of backtracked a bit, and he said, Buddhist practitioners, secular mindfulness practitioners should have a strong background in Buddhist practice. So initially he tried to separate the two, then later he went back and said, this is important part, especially this, the spiritual part, more than its virtues, part of virtue is a kind of part we need to come into this mindfulness. So secular mindfulness is, there are advantages. There are lots of studies. There are some randomized studies as well recently that is, which is shown that mindfulness is good as a drug in treating relapse in depression. So it all depends on the goal, end goal. We want to end suffering, here's the path, the Eightfold Path. But if you want to have stress reduction, this is something for you. It's just like eating an apple. It's, even if you eat the skin, it's very beneficial, some fiber. But if you eat the whole apple, that's something different.
Well, I would say that for most of us, we're not aiming for enlightenment in this life, so we're not ending complete suffering, right? Many people would even say, I'm looking forward to my next life. So if we were to embrace and practice mindfulness to improve the quality of our life now, is that really a problem, especially among the monastics? Even some monastics are not really going for enlightenment in this life. So what's your view on this in terms of, yes, this is now a big industry, but religion has always been a big industry. So what's the difference?
Good question. I think Pial spoke really well to the fact that there is a danger that mindfulness can result in the reduction of Buddhist Dharma to a therapeutic technique. And I think most of the monastics here would see that a loss inherent in that. And that comes to questions of what is being transmitted with mindfulness-based stress reduction, dialectical behavior therapy, ACT, and a whole range of other therapeutic techniques using Buddhist practices. For instance, there's often a focus solely on impermanence or present moment awareness, not so much on the two truths or on emptiness of phenomena. So I think that there are those questions about whether that's the danger, the loss of essential parts of the Dharma in the secularization of the practice.
So this is on the basis that we're assuming that the monastics have been teaching meditation, and for a period of time it wasn't the case. In fact, if anything, I would attribute that John Kabat-Zinn has done an amazing job in incorporating mindfulness in a secular way, and therefore it's now being adopted in both the education and also the medical context. So don't you think that's really been a boost rather than been a
Definitely, I should contextualize. I definitely don't think that mindfulness is a bad phenomena or that the revolution is an unfortunate thing. I think we just have to question how it's done and how it's transmitted and what other forces are in play, because it always comes into a context. I think the flow-on effects of mindfulness spreading can be really positive. We just have to make sure we're aware. Some people would like mindfulness to be this apolitical thing, but it's always in a political context. So it will carry whatever the society it comes into has, and that's how acculturation happens. Buddhism has changed from every culture that it has entered. But it's a question of, how we'd like to see it develop and grow.
Well, as you mentioned politics, interestingly, the UK, through the Oxford University, published the Mindful Nation report. This is in 2012. And Tim Ryan, congressman of US, has in fact been pushing as well a Mindful Nation report. Sorry, that was 2012. And UK was in 2015 by Oxford. So yes, it's political in some sense, but wow, don't you think it would be a great thing if Trump became more mindful?
I don't think there are also
if that was
mindful,
ever possible, yeah.
There are mindful snipers as well. Like that's my question is around like ethics has been carved off by the mindfulness movement as it's come in secular society. So there's a question of what aspects of the Dharma we're losing out. Like if Trump just becomes more attentive and concentrated, that's not necessarily going to be a positive thing for the world.
Yes, PL, you have something to comment on?
Yes, I think the definition of John Kabat-Singh's was the key word was non-judgmental awareness. That's kind of misleading because in Buddhist teachings, Buddha never talked about non-judgmental. There is always skillful judgment going on. Buddha actually took a metaphor, mindfulness as a gatekeeper. This is a skillful gatekeeper. He knows he's mindful, he's alert, and he knows what's going on, so he has to get a feedback. Atapi, Sampajano, Satima. These are the three essential qualities of right mindfulness. Atapi, you have to put the effort, the right effort, to discriminate between skillful and unskillful. Sampajano is the feedback, that is the more wisdom part of it, and the Satima is to remember to do that repeatedly. So this is a skillful gatekeeper. So sometimes this word non-judgmental awareness can be misleading in this original definition of John Kabat-Zinn. So I believe this is sometimes get too diluted over time, and now it's becoming more like a fast food, like a Mac mindfulness and so on. So it's got to be careful this when you define these things. And also there's no consensus. Even the scientists now come to the last paper on mind hype. They're talking about there is no consensus on the definition. Even in the research can be problematic in the future. So they are at a crossroad right now trying to define mindfulness. So Bhikkhu Analeo specifically recent paper 2018, he said we need to inject more textural, like a depth into mindfulness from sutras. So I think getting into the four foundations of mindfulness is a very important part of the right mindfulness definition.
So I think that there's always been a contention in how John Kabat-Zinn's definition has sometimes been misinterpreted. When he defines paying attention in the present moment non-judgmentally, what he was trying to do is to say that can we be present without the biasness and the prejudice? So we can be really aware of the situation as is. So it's not to say that won't be judgment. I don't think our mind is capable of just not having thoughts and making judgment. It's how to be able to consciously put that aside so we could interact with an individual or look at the situation without our biasness and the anger that comes with the biasness. So, I mean, as both having been a Buddhist and also now teaching secular mindfulness, what I see is the attraction of people coming to learn meditation without worrying that they will be converted or they have to be religious. And really, is ethics unique to religion? I mean, are we saying that a free thinker or an atheist is not ethical? I mean, I think sometimes they can be more ethical. So, what's your view, Reverend?
Yeah, so, I think Dharma-centered, maybe I could say Dharma-centered mindfulness is maybe as a Buddhist for us to go. And then, so when Dharma is a center of a life, or Dharma is kind of, we live with Dharma, and then that's how we are improved or transformed ethically. And then, so that's how, we can maybe see things in a different way, or we can start thinking things from a different perspective. That's how Dharma practically changes our life and make us more ethical.
I think that's a really good point. And so whilst I think that we can talk about the way mindfulness is taught and whether it has a focus on precept keeping, I think there is some research coming out showing that it's more effective if it does have some ethical orientation. But actually what I'm particularly interested in at the moment is Dharmic communities and secular Buddhist communities which are putting attention into social justice work and into thinking about economic class system that we have, and also thinking about climate change. So there's a number of different organizations. Some of you locals might be aware of, like San Francisco Dharma Center. There's Eco Dharma in Boulder. There's like a number of emerging Gen X or millennial teachers who have this focus upon structural oppressions and like working that into Dharma transmission, which is a big question. I think it's an interesting point we made earlier that learning Dharma ourselves can change the world in a way, but there has been there's a great book called American Dharma by Anne Gleig, which explores a shift that has taken place from first generation Dharma teachers of the baby boomer generation who had a real emphasis upon Dharma being able to change the world, and more recent millennial and Gen X teachers who are aware of all these structural concerns which haven't been addressed and which really need to be considered additionally too. They shouldn't be just ignored or passed over with the assumption that Dharma would resolve all these problems in and of themselves. And they make some, it's an interesting book to follow up.
Thank you. Wanted to follow up?
Talking about Dharma, true or false Dharma, Buddha gave a beautiful guideline in the Mahaparinibbana Sutra called the 4 Great References. He said, somebody comes and says, this is the teaching of the Buddha, or I have heard from the Buddha himself. So always go back, trace back to the original teachings, the Dhamma and the Vinaya. And if you cannot trace it there, you must say this person is mistaken or just kind of reject it. If you can trace it back word to original Dhamma and the Vinaya, then he said you may accept it. He didn't force it. Dhamma is never forced. It's ehipassiko, come and investigate. So this is a beautiful guideline we have. And also with the warned about counterfeit Dhamma in the future. Yeah, there's a sutra called...
Did you say counterfeit?
Yep.
Okay. Don't you think there's really a lot of counterfeits? Not for the future, it's now.
It's happening now. Buddha said that 2,500 years ago, it's happening right now. So he warned, he knew it's going to happen. He said it's like something like gold. You have gold, but there's another gold which will appear in the future. It'll be shinier, more beautiful, it's cheaper. And people would want to use it. But this is, monks, be careful. So with the corrupt Dhamma will corrupt discipline will go corrupt Dhamma. So this is the decline of the teaching. So we need to stop this bleeding. That's why I'm saying we need to come out with the proper kind of definition for right mindfulness. And otherwise, people are going to take it away to the fast food chain mindfulness.
So I'd like to dwell a little bit on that when you talk about, is it counterfeit Dhamma or counterfeit practices? Because even somebody who wears a robe doesn't mean he is practicing the Dhamma necessarily, right?
Not
I mean,
necessarily.
Ajahn Brahm got kicked out of a monastery because he ordained women. So is that counterfeit Dhamma practice, or is...
Counterfeit is a teaching. The teaching of the sutra being changed into according to the way you like it. I mean, you like the counterfeit gold because Shiva is easier to use. It's fun. But the real gold will disappear. That's meaning people will try to use more easier techniques.
So I'm trying to put this in the context of what's happening today.
Yeah.
So I like to just use the example of Ajahn Brahm being expelled from his monastery in Thailand.
That's a totally different
for ordaining women. So who is the counterfeiter?
That's a Vinaya thing. I'm talking about that.
No, let's talk about that, right? Because this is real.
This is a
like many religions, women are not treated equal.
Yes.
And when a man decides to stand up for a woman, he gets expelled.
He did the right thing. He thought it was the right thing.
He did the right thing,
Yeah.
but the people expel him. Feels that they're
that's
doing the
their-
right thing.
their
So
problem.
who is the counterfeiter?
It's their thinking. I mean, you don't have to fit into a certain framework or ideas.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to do what you think is right at the end for human suffering. If somebody is ready to take on this path, you should. It doesn't matter female or male. You should let them be. Let them carry on. So you should encourage that. So I think he did the right thing against all.
So this is what's scary about being right or wrong, right? There is this sense of I'm right and you're wrong. So and is this the human mind, or is this really the Buddha's teachings, or we just want to be the righteous one? So Reverend, what's your view on this? I mean, and if you could explain in Japanese Buddhism, although you're Reverend, you're married, you've got hair, and and how did this happen?
Thank you
Is
very
this
much.
right? Is this right monasticism or wrong? So, could we explore that?
Yeah, when I got this topic for our panel, what is right and wrong mindfulness, I started wondering, what does it mean? So who make a judgment, right and wrong, right? So always this kind of dualistic, judgment is issue in Buddhism, right? And then usually our ego, our ignorance is a kind of criteria or on which we make a decision, this is right, this is wrong, right? So, and then in many cases, because of, based on our ego or ignorance, that's why we humans make a wrong decisions, wrong judgment, right? So that's why here, right and wrong mindfulness, I think, again, Dharma-centered, always Dharma is the center when we make a judgment, we make a decision. I think that's the way to go as a Buddhist. And then, that's a very good question. So we are Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. Japanese Pure Land Buddhism started 12th century. And then our founder, he was a monk, but somehow he was kicked out. And then kicked out or he left the monastic life. And then he exposed himself into the, just a common people. And then spreading the Dharma, and then live a kind of similar life as a Buddhist. And then I think that's how he started being a mindfulness. How, like a lay people living day-to-day life. And then that's how he became more mindfulness, the reality of this samsara. And then how we should address, spread the Dharma into those people in suffering in a secular way. So that's how our tradition started. And then we ordained, but we still have a hair, and then we have, marriage. So it's kind of strange, Buddhism, but it works. And then many people kind of attracted to this teaching, right? So
Yeah, so I'm just wondering whether people would call that counterfeit.
yeah.
Because it's not exactly what the Buddha introduced in the Vinaya, that you're allowed to marry and
Right.
not renounce.
So the question is in Vinaya or precept, how about the people who have no time to, no time or no chance for the monastic life or especially medieval Japan, the Buddhism is only, part of people, only certain group of people. Most people are kind of excluded from the Dharma. So that's why in the Kamakura period, medieval Japan, many Buddhist monks, they left the monastery and then jump into the populace. And then they started teaching the Dharma. And then, so that's how Buddhism spread all throughout Japan. So I think this is a kind of big shift or change of Japanese Buddhism. Try to, more, not secularize, but to spread the Dharma for all people, like a Mahayana Buddhism, right?
Thank you. So Jillian, if I may explore your research interest in neuroscience, how has neuroscience supported the development and practice of mindfulness in the context of in today's modern world where you don't have to be a Buddhist to be practicing meditation?
So, that's a big question. There's a lot of research coming out about a whole range of different effects that mindfulness practice may or may not have on the brain, and a lot of it is very positive, a lot of it's very optimistic. I recently attended the Mind and Life conference, Summer Research Institute, which Pial has attended, I think, previously, which is sort of more or less a convergence point for neuroscientists and contemplative scholars. It's really exciting work, and it's been a driving force behind the mindfulness revolution. However, the dialogue that takes place is often quite unidirectional, so less a dialogue than a scientific, neuroscientific exploration of monks in fMRI machines testing brainwaves, and whilst it has spread throughout the Western world, this is really positive. But I think a dialogue should have two directions. I think we need more contemplative scholars and philosophers being able to explore the actual Dharma, not just whether your brain gets a bit sharper, whether you become a bit more concentrated and alert, and live longer, whether your telomeres don't shrink so rapidly, so you prevent cancer onset. This is great information, but we also need to think about what is the Dharma, and what's being lost in the transmission west. I think, as PL mentioned earlier, there is a threat. I mean, counterfeit is a difficult term, like you said, because there is constant cultural baggage which is being lost and adopted as Buddhism shifts from place to place. But I think there's a tendency for power to go unnoted. And at the moment, third-person scientific methods are powerful, capitalism and neoliberalism are powerful, and this can often mean that smaller voices get overruled.
Thank you. So in our last 10 minutes, I'd like to just get everyone to summarize their points and before we close. So who would like to start?
As I said, we got to remember this, the faculty of mindfulness. I want to make that separation from right mindfulness. Right mindfulness is the path, but the faculty of mindfulness helping that the right mindfulness with the right effort, as well as the sampajana part, which is the feedback part. So all these three things have to be there around the four foundational mindfulness to have a clear definition of right mindfulness. So the focus is the four foundational mindfulness is the mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of thoughts, and mental phenomena have to be included. So every time there are beautiful similes, metaphors given by the Buddha. Every time we get into trouble, we go outside our ancestral domain. There are two similes. The story about the quail who went outside the domain and a monkey who got caught to the hunter. So every time, you need to think of in these four frameworks or contemplation of mindfulness to get the full depth of right mindfulness.
Thank you. Reverend?
So again, my understanding of Buddhist mindfulness is know ourselves, and then by knowing ourselves, we can be changed or we can be transformed. But how can we become more mindful of my everyday life? How can we see things more clearly? I think our tradition put much emphasis on the light from the Buddha, light from the Dharma. So we humans, maybe we don't have a good eyes to see things as they are, but with the guidance of Dharma or with the guidance of light of Buddha, especially Amida Buddha, and then now we can see things more clearly. And then that's how we can become more mindful of things all around us. And then, of course, myself. And then that's how we practice mindfulness. And then that's how we become changed, transformed. And then by each of us changing this way, and then collectively, society, community has been changed with the power of Dharma. And then this whole world become more peaceful and then wonderful world.
Thank you, Reverend. Julian?
I'd firstly just like to thank Dharma Dharini for taking me in since I've arrived in the United States, and to say I've been really blessed to see the intersection of Dharma through these communities and also the secular mindfulness movement. So looking at that intersection, I feel like there's so much potential for fruitful dialogue and for global change. However, the concern I'd like to raise, I just end with someone else's words. Slavoj Žižek wrote that mindfulness is establishing itself as the hegemonic ideology of global capitalism. By helping people to fully participate in the capitalist dynamic while retaining the appearance of mental sanity. He's known for big pronouncements, but his concern is that Western Buddhism may provide the perfect ideological supplement for the smooth running of global capitalism. So the concern is just to avoid that happening, to try and ensure that we're aware of the structural realities that we're arriving in when we're practicing, when we're teaching mindfulness secularly and in Dharmic communities, and it's not a contextless phenomenon.
Thank you, Julian. And I would just like to end the session by saying that I would consider wrong mindfulness coming with the wrong intention on why we teach or why we live a certain way of life. A sniper is very mindful. He is completely focused on getting his target, and the outcome would be harmful because the act of killing is considered harmful by any definition of a religion or ethics. So right mindfulness, I would think that it has to do with what is our intention and what is our ultimate goal. If we're going to be teaching mindfulness for creating wealth for ourselves, I would think that that might be a concern. But I would also say that even in religion, some religious leaders are doing it with the goodness of the heart, and some are doing with intention of accumulating wealth. So it is not to say that the secular teachers are worse or better. I would caution that everyone chooses the teacher that they decide to go with, whether it's secular mindfulness or religious mindfulness or anything for that matter. Is buyers beware. So I think that all of us need to access our inner wisdom, follow the Buddha's teachings. The Buddha himself never said follow him or his successor, but to always follow the teachings. So with that, I thank you all for your attention, and thank you the panelists for this session.